Not the kind of woman who makes a scene. Never have been. I've raised my son to know that, and I thought he'd raised his wife to at least respect it. But standing outside that church in my good navy dress with my small suitcase still at my feet, I understood something I'd been too hopeful to see before. Quiet people can be walked on for a very long time before anyone notices they've stopped getting up. Let me back up. My name isn't important, but the people in this story are. I'm 67 years old. I retired 2 years ago from 31 years of bookkeeping for a dental practice in Dayton, Ohio. My husband, Frank, passed in 2019. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We had one son, Colt, and I poured everything I had into making sure that boy grew up knowing he was loved. Colt is 41 now. He married a woman named Adrian 12 years ago. She's from money, or at least her family acts like they are, which I've come to understand is almost the same thing in terms of the attitude it produces. They live outside of Scottsdale, Arizona, in a house with a 3-car garage and a pool that nobody swims in. They have 2 kids, my grandchildren, Bo, who just turned 22, and Lily, who is 19. Before I go further, I want to say something about Bo and Lily. They are good kids. Whatever happened between me and their parents, those 2 never had anything to do with it, and I want that to be clear. The trouble with Adrian started small, the way most trouble does. A comment here, a look there. The first Thanksgiving I hosted after Frank died, she rearranged my kitchen while I was taking a nap because she told Colt it would be more efficient. She didn't ask, she just moved things. I found my mother's Cermatic mixing bowl, the one with the blue stripe that she brought over from her own mother's house, on the second shelf instead of the first. And when I mentioned it, Adrian said she thought I'd appreciate having more counter space. I let it go. Frank had always said I was good at letting things go. I thought it was a compliment. I'm not sure anymore. After Frank passed, I had money. Not extravagant money, but real money. Frank was careful his whole life. He drove the same truck for 14 years, never took on credit card debt, and held on to a life insurance policy he'd been paying into since 1987. When he died, I received $420,000. I also had the house paid off and my pension from the dental practice. Colt knew about the insurance money. I told him because I thought families should be honest with each other. About 8 months after the funeral, Colt called to tell me that Adrian wanted to open a home staging business. She had a real eye for interiors, he said, and she'd already lined up a few clients, but she needed capital to cover equipment, a van, a small warehouse space for furniture inventory. He asked if I would consider investing. I want to be precise here because the number matters. I gave them $120,000. Not a loan. I want to be honest about that too. I told Colt I didn't want him to feel burdened by repayment. I said it was a gift, as long as the business was something Adrian was serious about. He said she was. Adrian's business did well. Better than well, actually. Within 2 years, she was staging properties for some of the bigger real estate agencies in the Phoenix metro area. I was genuinely proud of her. I sent her a card when she got her first commercial contract. She texted Colt to say thank you, and Colt passed it along to me. She never called me directly. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. Around that same time, Bo started college. He was going to Arizona State, and the tuition wasn't small. Colt mentioned, casually, over the phone one Sunday, that they were stretched thin because of the business expansion. I offered to help with Bo's first year, $14,200. I pulled it from savings and wrote the check to the university directly. Colt said thank you. He sounded genuinely grateful. Adrian didn't say anything at all. The next year I covered Bo's second year too, then his third. By the time he was finishing his 4th year, it had become something that was simply expected. There was no conversation anymore. Colt would mention tuition in passing, the way you mentioned that the gas bill came, and somehow the money would need to appear, and somehow I would be the one to make it appear. I don't say this to sound like a martyr. I did it because I wanted to. Bo is my grandson. I would do it again tomorrow. What wore me down wasn't the giving, it was the silence around it. Nobody said, "Mom, this is too much." Nobody said, "Are you sure you can afford this?" Nobody said thank you in a way that felt like they meant it rather than like they were checking a box. Lily started college the year after Bo graduated. Private school this time, a small liberal arts college in Colorado that cost $38,000 a year. Colt asked me to cover her first year. I said yes. I said yes the second year too. By then, I had given this family, between the business investment and the tuition and the smaller things I don't even want to count, a birthday check here, a flight home for Christmas there, somewhere close to $250,000 over 6 years. That's not a complaint, that's just the truth. I want to tell you about last spring, because that's where everything changed. Bo got engaged. His girlfriend's name is Priya, and she's lovely, warm, funny, the kind of young woman who looks you in the eye when she talks to you and actually listens when you answer. I liked her from the first phone call. They decided on a June wedding in Sedona, at one of those Red Rock venues that costs more for 4 hours than my mother made in a year. I was excited in a way I hadn't been excited about anything since Frank died. I went out and bought a dress, real silk, deep rose, not the kind of thing I usually spend money on. I made an appointment to get my hair done. I booked a flight, non-stop Dayton to Phoenix, because Colt had said he would pick me up and we'd drive to Sedona together. 3 weeks before the wedding, Colt called. He didn't open with anything small. He just said, "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you react." I said okay. He said that Adrian was worried. He used her name, like she wasn't in the room, but I could feel her there, that I might not understand the formality of the venue, that the reception was going to be a very particular kind of event. He said the families were paying a lot for it to go a certain way, and that I had been, in his words, sometimes unpredictable at family events. I asked him to give me an example. There was a pause. Then he said that at their anniversary dinner 2 years ago, I had brought up Frank's death and made people uncomfortable. I remembered that dinner. I had said when someone toasted to long marriages that I missed Frank and wished he could have been there. That was the whole thing. That was the incident. I told Colt I understood. And then I stayed quiet for a moment because I was choosing my words very carefully, which is what I do when I'm trying not to say something I'll regret. I said, "Colt, I'm his grandmother. I've paid for 4 years of his education. I bought the dress I'm wearing to this wedding. I have a non-stop flight booked for June 14th. Are you telling me I'm not welcome?" He said he wasn't saying that. He said he was just asking me to be mindful. I said I would be mindful. I flew to Phoenix on June 14th. Colt picked me up and we drove to Sedona. In the whole 2 hours, he talked about the weather and the traffic and Priya's family's catering choices, and I looked out the window at the desert and thought about Frank and how he always said the Southwest looked like another planet. I thought that was probably still true. We got to the venue about an hour before the ceremony. It was everything you'd expect. Red rocks, white chairs, flowers I couldn't name, people and linen. Beautiful, honestly. I was glad for Bo. I had just found my seat on the family side when Adrian appeared beside me. She didn't sit down. She stood at the end of the aisle in a pale green dress, and she said quietly, so only I could hear, "I need you to move to the other side. Family only on this side." I looked at her. I said, "I am family." She said, "The immediate family side, you understand." I want to tell you that I said something sharp and devastating, because that would make for a better story, but I didn't. I picked up my program, I picked up my small beaded clutch, and I walked across the aisle and sat on the groom's side as though that had been my plan all along. I didn't cry. I'm very good at not crying when people are watching. The ceremony was beautiful. Bo cried when he saw Priya walk toward him, and I could see his shoulders shaking from where I sat, and I pressed my hand flat against my knee, and I breathed. At the reception, I sat at a table in the back, near the bar with some of Priya's extended family from out of town, people I'd never met, who were kind to me because they didn't know enough not to be. A woman named Faye from New Jersey told me I had beautiful posture. I thanked her. We talked about her grandchildren for 20 minutes, and it was the realest conversation I had all night. Colt came by the table once between courses. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You okay?" And I said, "I'm fine, sweetheart." Because what else do you say at your grandson's wedding? I stayed through the first dance and the cake cutting. I watched Bo and Priya laugh together, and I was glad for that part. I truly was. Then I found the car service I prearranged. I'd had the feeling I might want an exit that was my own, and I left. I got back to the hotel. I sat on the edge of the bed in my rose silk dress and my good shoes, and I didn't turn on the TV, and I didn't call anyone. I just sat there and thought about what $250,000 buys you. In the morning, I changed my return flight. I went home a day early. For 3 weeks, I didn't hear from Colt. That's not unusual. We talk maybe once a week under normal circumstances. But this was after a family wedding, and I suppose I thought, I don't know what I thought. He finally called on a Tuesday evening. He asked how I was settling back in. I said, fine. He said the wedding had been wonderful, hadn't it? I said it was beautiful. Then I said, Colt, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you respond. He said, okay. I told him what Adrian had said to me, word for word, as close as I could manage. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was sure she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. I said, she moved me out of the family section at my own grandson's wedding. How many ways can that sound? He said she'd been under enormous stress with the planning. I said I understood that, and then I said what I'd been working up to saying for 3 weeks. I said I've been reviewing my financial plans. I've decided to make some changes to how I've structured my estate. He asked what I meant. I told him that I'd met with my attorney, which was true. I'd called her the week I got home, and that I'd made some revisions to my will. In the current version, Colt was the primary beneficiary of what remained of my estate after specific charitable bequests. I'd also had a provision setting aside funds for Lily's remaining college tuition, since she has 1 year left. I told him I was removing the provision for Lily's tuition. Not because of Lily. I want to be clear about that. I called Lily directly the following week, and I told her that I would still make sure she was taken care of, personally, separately, and that none of this was about her. She cried a little and said she didn't understand what was happening, and I said I knew, and I was sorry she was caught in it, and I meant it. What I removed from Colt's expectation was the larger bequest. I didn't tell him the exact figures, because that's not his information to have yet, but I told him clearly that his inheritance would be materially different from what he might have anticipated. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Is this about the seating?" And I said, "It's about 23 years of marriage to someone who has treated me like a guest in this family. The seating was just the last time I was willing to overlook it." He didn't say much after that. He said he needed to talk to Adrian. I said that was fine, and that I loved him, and that I hoped we could find a way through this, but that I wasn't going to negotiate on my own dignity. Then I said goodnight. He called back 4 days later. He didn't mention Adrian. He just said, "Mom, can I come visit?" I said yes. He drove from Scottsdale to Dayton, 14 hours. He did it in one stretch, arrived on a Friday evening, and I had dinner ready, pot roast, the one he's always loved, with the carrots and the small potatoes. He ate 2 plates and didn't say anything about Adrian for almost 2 hours. We talked about Frank. We talked about when Colt was small. All the things we hadn't talked about in a long time. Then he said, "I know I've let her treat you badly. I don't have a good reason for it." I told him I didn't need a reason. I needed it to stop. He said he understood, and I believe him, or I'm choosing to believe him, which might be the same thing at this stage of life. Bo called me a week after Colt's visit. He'd apparently heard some version of what happened, pieced together from what Colt told him, and he was upset. Not at me, at his mother. He said, "Grandma, I didn't know she said that to you. I'm so sorry. I would never have wanted that." I told him I knew that. I told him his wedding was beautiful and that watching him marry Priya was one of the best moments of the last few years, and I meant it completely. He said, "You should have been sitting next to Dad." I said, "I know." We talked for a long time that evening, and at the end he said, "Can I come see you this summer?" I said I would love that. I'm not going to tell you everything is resolved, because it isn't. Adrian hasn't called. I don't expect her to, and I'm not waiting. Colt and I are talking again, really talking, in a way we maybe hadn't in years, and I think that matters. Lily is starting her final year in the fall, and I transferred her tuition directly to the college, quietly, because that was always between her and me. My attorney has the revised documents. They're signed. They're filed. I didn't do it out of anger, and I want to be clear about that too. I did it because I finally understood something Frank used to say. He said the problem with being generous is that some people will take it as proof that your time is also free, your feelings are also available, and your seat at the table is negotiable. He was a wise man. I should have listened more carefully. I still have the rose silk dress hanging in my closet. I wore it to my friend Doris's birthday dinner last month, and she said I looked wonderful. We had a long meal. the kind that drifts from wine into dessert into coffee without anyone checking the time. And I drove home in the dark with the windows down and the Ohio summer coming in warm and full of fireflies, and I thought, this is also a life. This, right here, is also enough. I don't need a seat at someone else's table. I set my own. I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between being generous and being taken for granted. For a long time, I confused the two. I thought that if I kept giving, kept showing up, kept writing the checks, kept saying yes when everything in me wanted to say, wait a minute, that would be enough to hold this family together. It wasn't. And I think somewhere deep down I knew that, but I kept going anyway because stopping felt like admitting that none of it had worked. What I've come to understand is that actions have weight, not in any cosmic or religious sense, just in the plain human sense that what we do accumulates. Every time I let something slide, Adrian rearranging my kitchen, the thank yous that never came, the years of tuition paid in silence, I was teaching people how to treat me. I didn't mean to, but I did. And the wedding was simply the moment that weight became too heavy to carry quietly anymore. Colt is a good man who spent too many years looking the other way. I don't say that to excuse him. Looking away is its own kind of choice, but I understand it better now than I did in June. He loved his wife and he loved his mother, and he handled that by hoping neither would require him to choose. That's not wisdom. That's postponement, and postponement always ends, one way or another. What I'm proudest of is not the will. People hear she changed her will, and they think revenge, but it wasn't that. It was clarity. It was finally being honest about what I valued and who had demonstrated they valued me back. That took something I wish I'd found sooner. The willingness to look at a situation plainly, without softening it to make myself feel better, and then act on what I actually saw rather than what I wished were true. That kind of clear-eyed honesty is hard. It costs something, but so does pretending. And then there's the matter of not falling apart. The morning after the wedding, sitting in that hotel room in my rose dress, I could have called someone and cried. I could have spiraled into everything I'd given and everything I'd lost. Instead, I changed my flight. I went home. I called my attorney. I made pot roast when Colt came to see me. I kept living. That's not toughness for its own sake. It's just the understanding that you don't get to sit down in the middle of the road because the road got hard. You keep walking, and you figure it out as you go. Beau is coming to visit this summer. We're going to sit on my back porch and drink iced tea and probably not talk about any of this. Which is exactly right. He called me. That matters more than I can say. I still have the dress. I'm going to keep wearing it.